Chancellor Zorp felt all 7 of his eye stalks twitch simultaneously, a sure sign that his third stomach was about to secrete excess bile. This particular physiological reaction had become so common during emergency Federation Council sessions that his personal physician had begun prescribing preventative enzymes before every meeting. Today, he'd forgotten to take them. The United Federation of Planets had maintained its galactic bureaucracy for precisely 17,433 cycles. In that time, they had developed the most inefficient system in the known universe. A beautifully complex web of committees, subcommittees, working groups, and task forces that ensured no decision was ever made without at least 3 decades of careful deliberation. Their headquarters, a sprawling crystalline structure that somehow managed to look both impossibly grand and utterly mundane, housed over 300 species diplomatic missions and enough paperwork to cover a small moon. Esteemed representatives of the United Federation, Chancellor Zorp began, his formal voice tinged with the particular strain that came from trying not to vomit in 7 different directions simultaneously. We face an unprecedented situation. The Grand Council chamber, with its tiered seating arranged in a perfect acoustic amplification pattern, erupted in murmurs. The word unprecedented hadn't been uttered in an official capacity for at least 2,000 cycles. The last time had been when a junior waste management technician had accidentally disposed of the original copy of the Federation Charter instead of its carbon copy. A mishap that had resulted in a 46-cycle investigation and the creation of 17 new subsections in the Federation Document Preservation Protocol. A planet known as Earth, Zorp continued, putting particular emphasis on the strange, guttural name, has achieved faster-than-light travel and submitted an application for Federation membership. The murmurs intensified. FDL development usually took at least 1,500 years from the discovery of atomic energy. The pathway was well established. Atomic energy, global unification, solar system colonization, quantum entanglement, and finally, after countless generations of incremental progress, the breakthrough to FTL travel. According to our intelligence, Zorp said, his eye stalks now quivering uncontrollably, this species achieved FTL capability less than 200 Earth years after splitting the atom. The chamber fell silent. Not the respectful silence of contemplation, but the stunned silence of collective incomprehension. Furthermore, Zorp added, his voice now barely a whisper, they have bypassed our standard 1,000-cycle application review process by directly delivering what they call a. He paused to consult his notes, a humanity starter kit, along with their application. At this, the chamber exploded in a cacophony of voices, tentacles, and telepathic projections. The Vulcan delegation raised their eyebrows precisely 2.7 centimeters. The Andorian representatives' antennae twisted into complex shapes that their xenolinguists would later struggle to translate. The Balians simply turned a deeper shade of blue. Deputy Director Glix, a lexiconian with a photographic memory and a pathological devotion to procedure, scuttled forward on his 6 articulated legs. Chancellor, this is completely outside protocol. The membership application process requires precisely 1,247 forms submitted in exact chronological order, beginning with Form XJ, 2991, Declaration of Intent to consider applying for potential future membership consideration. Zorp nodded sadly. I am aware, Deputy Director. Yet here we are. He gestured toward a plain white box sitting on the ceremonial pedestal of significant objects. The box bore no markings except for a simple curved line with 2 dots above it, arranged in a way that unervingly resembled a face. Is that smiling at us? Whispered a horrified Tellarite ambassador to his aide. The humans call it an emoji, explained Zorp. Apparently, it denotes positive emotion. They've weaponized emotional signifiers, gasped a Betazoid counselor. No, Zorp said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. At least we don't think so. The Federation prided itself on its methodical approach to everything, particularly the integration of new species. The process was designed to take generations, allowing ample time for cultural exchange, diplomatic training, and the gradual introduction of Federation values. This Humanity Starter Kit represented a fundamental breakdown of that carefully orchestrated process. It was as if the humans had walked into a formal dinner, ignored the 17 types of forks laid out for the 17-course meal, and instead pulled out a spork. "I propose," Zorp said, trying to regain control of his digestive discomfort, "that we establish an emergency analysis committee to examine the contents of this kit." The motion passed unanimously, the first and likely last time the Federation Council would agree on anything so quickly. Deputy Director Glix was appointed head of the analysis committee, a decision he acknowledged with a formal bow that involved touching each of his 6 legs to his forehead in succession. As the council members filed out, Zorp remained, staring at the innocent-looking box. That strange emoji seemed to stare back, its curved line almost taunting in its simplicity. Zorp couldn't help but feel that the ordered universe of the Federation had just encountered something it was woefully unprepared for, a species that didn't seem to understand, or worse, didn't seem to care about, the proper way of doing things. His 7th eye stalk twitched independently, a sure sign that his 4th stomach was joining the rebellion. It was going to be a long week. The Emergency Analysis Committee convened in Conference Room J7, a sterile space specifically designed to eliminate any potential distractions. Its walls were painted the Federation's officially approved shade of beige, Pantone 4517C, bureaucratic taupe, and the lighting was set to precisely 756 lumens, bright enough for most species to see clearly, dim enough to prevent any unwanted emotional responses. Deputy Director Glix had assembled a team of the Federation's foremost xenoanthropologists, linguists, psychologists, and cultural analysts. The team represented 17 different species, each selected for their expertise and reputation for unflappable calm. "Colleagues," Glix began, his voice perfectly modulated to convey serious purpose without undue alarm. "We have been tasked with analyzing the contents of the Humanity Starter Kit and providing a comprehensive report to the Council within one standard cycle. This time frame is," he paused, his mandibles clicking in distress, "unprecedented." On the central table sat the white box, still bearing that unsettlingly simple, curved face. Next to it was a stack of Federation standard analysis forms, each 700 pages long. "Before we open the package," Glix continued, "I believe it would be valuable to gather our existing knowledge about humans. Ambassador Vieller, I understand Vulcan has had preliminary observations of Earth." The Vulcan representative rose, his tall, lean frame perfectly poised. "Indeed, our long-range cultural observation satellites have been monitoring Earth transmissions for approximately 200 years. Based on these observations, humans appear to be a deeply contradictory species." "Contradictory in what way?" asked the Andorian ambassador, her antennae twitching with suspicion. "They simultaneously create art depicting their own extinction and appear to find it entertaining," Vieller replied. "They develop medical technologies to extend their lives while engaging in recreational activities that statistically shorten them. They form deep emotional attachments to non-sentient species that evolved as their natural predators." "That can't possibly be accurate," snorted the Tellarite ambassador, known for his argumentative nature. "No species would keep predators in their dwellings. Cats and dogs," Vieller stated flatly, "descended from hunters. They keep them as pets. The humans costume them and speak to them as if they were small, furry infants." A Quaitian historian, whose species had evolved from feline ancestors, made a sound of deep distress and had to be escorted from the room. "Perhaps we should proceed with the unboxing," suggested Glix, noting the rising tension. "Dr. Trala, as our chief xenoanthropologist, would you do the honors?" Dr. Trala, a statuesque Khitan with golden fur and unblinking green eyes, approached the box cautiously. With precise movements, she lifted the lid. The committee collectively leaned forward. Inside the box was a data crystal, several small packages labeled snacks, a folded piece of clothing, and a handwritten note on actual paper. a material so rarely used in the Federation that several committee members gasped at the extravagance. Dr. Tprala lifted the note with sterile tongs and read aloud. Hey there, space friends. We figured you might want to get to know us better, so we've put together this little introduction to humanity. Consider it a cosmic icebreaker. Can't wait to join the galactic community. Zoxo Earth. What does Zoxo signify? Asked a bewildered Balian security analyst. Is it a code? A threat? According to our linguistic database, it represents kisses and hugs, replied the Denobulan linguist, looking deeply uncomfortable. It appears to be an expression of affection. They're expressing physical affection in an official diplomatic communication. Glick's mandibles clicked so rapidly they became a blur. This is unprecedented, supplied Vieller helpfully. The committee spent the next 3 hours debating whether to proceed with analyzing the contents or to seal the box and recommend immediate rejection of Earth's application. In the end, curiosity prevailed, a decision that several committee members would later regret during their psychological debriefings. The data crystal was cautiously inserted into a heavily firewalled Federation standard data reader. It contained several terabytes of information, neatly categorized in folders labeled entertainment, food and drink, sports and recreation, internet highlights, music, and mysteriously, in case of emergency memes. Glix assigned each category to a subcommittee and ordered round-the-clock analysis. The results began to filter in within hours, and with each new report, the emergency committee's collective anxiety rose. The entertainment subcommittee reported first, led by a visibly shaken Trill analyst. They appear to be obsessed with apocalyptic scenarios, she reported. Approximately 67.3% of their fictional visual entertainment, which they call movies, involve either their extinction, near extinction, or transformation into shambling undead creatures called zombies. Perhaps they are prophetic, suggested an Ullian telepath. No, replied the Trill. They consider these scenarios fun. They consume this entertainment with a food they call popcorn, while experiencing what they term a good time. The Food and Drink Subcommittee's report was no less disturbing. They deliberately consume spoiled animal secretions, stated the Denobulan nutritionist. A substance called cheese, which is essentially milk that has been colonized by bacteria and fungi, is considered a delicacy. Furthermore, they intentionally ferment beverages until they become toxic, then consume them for pleasure while knowing they impair cognitive function. That can't possibly be right, Glix insisted. No rational species would poison themselves for enjoyment. They call it happy hour, the nutritionist replied grimly. The Sports and Recreation report caused a Vulcan observer to request a brief meditation break. They throw themselves out of atmospheric vehicles and fall toward the ground with only fabric to slow their descent. They slide down frozen water on narrow planks. They intentionally collide with each other while pursuing inflated animal skins. One popular activity involves forcing one's body through the water at speeds approaching physiological limits while holding one's breath. Glick's mandibles had stopped clicking entirely, a sign of deep lexiconian distress. It gets worse, continued the recreation analyst. Many of these activities are not even for survival or procreation. The humans call them extreme sports and perform them for fun. By the time the Internet Highlights Subcommittee made their presentation, the Emergency Committee had been in session for 16 straight hours. Several members had requested psychological support, and one Vulcan had admitted to experiencing something dangerously close to an emotion. The humans have created a global information network, the communications expert began. In theory, it contains the sum total of their knowledge and should represent the pinnacle of their civilization. And does it? Asked Glix, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. They use it primarily to share pictures of cats, argue with strangers, and disseminate something called memes, which appear to be inside jokes shared by billions of individuals simultaneously. Can you provide an example of these memes? Asked Vieller, still committed to scientific thoroughness despite the collective dread filling the room. The communications expert reluctantly activated a view screen. This appears to be particularly popular. It's called a rickroll. What followed was a human male with rudimentary bipedal locomotion patterns singing about emotional commitment. The chorus, which repeated the phrase, "never gonna give you up," with inexplicable enthusiasm, caused two committee members to leave the room and another to curl into a protective ball. "Turn it off," ordered Glix after 37 seconds. "Federation have mercy, turn it off." When the view screen went dark, a heavy silence fell over the room. "We must inform the council immediately," Glix finally said, his voice hollow. "These humans, they're not like us." "That is an understatement," Deputy Director Vieller remarked, his left eyebrow raised so high it disappeared beneath his hairline. "They appear to be fundamentally irrational, pursuing danger and disorder with enthusiasm while documenting it all with crude audio-visual technology. Yet they achieved FTL travel in just 2 centuries," mused the Andorian ambassador. "There must be something functional about their chaotic approach." As the committee prepared their preliminary report, none of them noticed the small flashing light on the data crystal, an automated subspace signal transmitting back to Earth with a simple message: "Package received. Initial contact. Protocol initiated." The humans were coming. The Grand Galactic Hall had been hastily prepared for what the Federation euphemistically called the formal unboxing ceremony. In reality, it was a desperate attempt to maintain some semblance of protocol while dealing with a rapidly unfolding human situation. Chancellor Zorp had taken a triple dose of his stomach medication and was feeling almost functional, though his eye stalks continued to betray his anxiety by pointing in slightly different directions. "Assembled representatives," he began, his voice carried perfectly through the hall by acoustic amplification crystals. "We have convened to witness the formal presentation of the findings from the Emergency Analysis Committee regarding the Humanity Starter Kit." The hall was packed with delegates from all 300-member species of the Federation. News of the humans' unorthodox approach had spread quickly, causing a level of interest not seen since the Great Cafeteria Menu debate of Cycle 16,997, when the introduction of Andorian frost beetles to the official menu had nearly caused a diplomatic incident. Deputy Director Glix approached the central podium, his gait noticeably stiffer than usual. The past 24 hours had clearly taken their toll. "Esteemed colleagues," he began, "what I am about to present challenges many of our fundamental assumptions about sentient civilization." For the next 2 hours, Glix methodically presented the committee's findings, complete with holographic projections of human memes, samples of their entertainment, and detailed analyses of their recreational activities. With each new revelation, the hall's reaction ranged from stunned silence to outright dismay. The presentation of human reality television caused particular consternation. "You mean to tell us," interrupted the Tellarite ambassador, "that humans voluntarily place themselves in artificial environments designed to create conflict, then broadcast the results to their entire species for entertainment?" "Correct," confirmed Glix. "The program called The Bachelor has apparently been running for over 50 Earth years. Humans compete to establish a mating bond with a single individual through a series of escalating social trials." "But why?" asked a confused Balian delegate. "Why not simply exchange genetic compatibility charts and proceed with logical mate selection?" Glix's mandibles clicked in the lexiconian equivalent of a helpless shrug. They appeared to find the uncertainty and emotional turmoil entertaining. The presentation of human food practices proved equally disturbing. The concept of eating contests left many delegates speechless. They compete to see who can consume the most sustenance in a limited time period, asked a horrified Vulcan nutritional scientist, with no purpose beyond the act itself. "Indeed," confirmed Glix. "The current Earth record holder consumed 76 hot dogs in 10 minutes. What practical application does this skill have?" demanded a practical-minded Tellarite. "None whatsoever," replied Glix. "It is done for glory, monetary compensation, and something called the lulls." As the presentation continued, the Federation delegates began to divide into distinct factions. One group, primarily composed of older, more established species, viewed humans with undisguised horror and advocated for immediate rejection of Earth's application. Another faction, mostly younger species who had joined the Federation more recently, displayed cautious curiosity about these unpredictable newcomers. A third, smaller group seemed almost fascinated by humans, particularly the Ferengi delegation, who had been frantically taking notes ever since the concept of chocolate had been explained. The most concerning portion of the analysis, however, came near the end. The contents of the folder labeled Internet, Glix explained, his voice now barely audible, contain what appears to be a warning. It reads, "Enter at your own risk." A ripple of alarm spread through the hall. "Is it a threat?" demanded the Andorian security chief. "No," replied Glix. "According to our analysis, it's humor. The humans are acknowledging that their global information network contains content that may be unsettling to non-humans." "What sort of content?" asked Chancellor Zorp, immediately regretting the question. Glick's compound eyes darted nervously. "Among other things, something called cat videos and fail compilations, the latter being recordings of humans experiencing minor misfortunes, set to rhythmic sound patterns. And they find the misfortune of others amusing?" asked a Betazoid counselor, looking deeply troubled. "Only if the subject is not seriously injured," clarified Glix. "If significant harm occurs, it apparently becomes inappropriate to express amusement for at least 22.7 years, after which it becomes something called a dark comedy." Just as Chancellor Zorp was about to call for a recess, his third stomach now in open rebellion against the rest of his digestive system, the grand doors of the hall swung open. A Federation security officer rushed in, his normally composed demeanor visibly shaken. "Chancellor," he gasped, "we've received a transmission from the solar system. A human vessel has entered Federation space and is requesting docking clearance. They say they're eager to meet everyone." "But that's impossible," sputtered Zorp. "We haven't issued a formal response to their application, let alone a visitation permit. The standard procedure requires at least 17 subcommittee approvals before any first contact scenario." "Sir," the security officer replied grimly, "they said, and I quote, 'We figure we'd save everyone some paperwork and just pop by to say hello in person.'" The hall erupted in chaos. Delegates shouted over one another, some demanding immediate defensive measures, others calling for diplomatic protocols to be followed despite the irregularity. A small contingent of Ferengi could be heard arguing about the potential profitability of being the first to establish trade relations with such an obviously irrational species. Chancellor Zorp's eye stalks all swiveled toward Deputy Director Glix, who had gone completely rigid, the lexiconian equivalent of fainting while still standing upright. "Federation preserve us," muttered Zorp. "They're already here." The Federation had protocols for first contact scenarios. Hundreds of them, in fact, bound in volumes that filled entire library wings. There were protocols for meeting atmospheric-dwelling species, aquatic species, silicon-based life forms, and even theoretical quantum state entities. What they didn't have was a protocol for a species that simply showed up unannounced and asked to join the interstellar community as if they were dropping by for a casual social visit. The humans had parked their ship, a surprisingly sleek vessel they called the USS Handshake, in the Federation headquarters' main docking bay, bypassing 3 security checkpoints by simply being so polite and enthusiastic that the confused guards had let them through. "They kept saying they brought cookies," reported the baffled Andorian security chief. The guards didn't know if it was a code word or a form of currency. Chancellor Zorp, Deputy Director Glix, now somewhat recovered but still unnaturally pale, and a hastily assembled welcoming committee awaited the humans in the grand reception hall. The space had been designed for precisely this sort of historic first meeting, with soaring ceilings, acoustics that translated speech into comprehensible form for all species, and environmental controls that could accommodate everything from methane breathers to silicon crystalline entities. What it wasn't designed for was the sheer awkwardness of meeting a species that had essentially invited itself over for dinner. The doors slid open, and 5 humans entered. They were bipedal, as expected, with the curious mix of apparent physical fragility and unexpected durability that the analysis committee had noted. Most surprising was their attire, where Federation officials wore elaborate ceremonial garments denoting their rank and species. The humans were dressed in what appeared to be casual business attire. One was even wearing something called jeans. "Howdy, everyone," called the lead human, a tall individual with curly hair and a wide facial expression that exposed their teeth. A smile, the xenopsychologist had explained, though several security officers still tensed at what looked to them like a threat display. "Sorry to drop in unannounced, but we figured face-to-face is always better than a pen-pal situation, right?" Chancellor Zorp's translator implant struggled momentarily with the idiomatic speech before rendering it in standard Federation diplomatic language. He stepped forward, all 7 eye stalks focused in a supreme effort of concentration. "On behalf of the United Federation of Planets, I extend formal greetings to the representatives of Earth," he said, carefully following the first contact script. "We acknowledge your presence with appropriate diplomatic consideration." The human smile widened. "Great to meet you too. I'm Captain Jessica Rodriguez of the USS Handshake. These are my colleagues, our xenobiologist Dr. Marcus Chun, Cultural Liaison Officer Priya Patel, Technological Exchange Specialist Engineer Kwame Nkosi, and our botanical expert Lieutenant Sam Gardner, who's brought some really awesome earth plants we thought you might get a kick out of." The lieutenant in question held up a small container. "It's coffee. We figured after all that paperwork you folks do, you could use a good caffeine boost." The Federation representatives stared in collective befuddlement. First contact protocols typically involved formal speeches, careful cultural exchange preliminaries, and at least 3 ceremonial gift authentication procedures. The humans had skipped straight to nicknames and stimulants. Deputy Director Glix stepped forward, his professional training overcoming his personal distress. "We have been analyzing your humanity starter kit," he said. "There are questions." "Fire away," said Captain Rodriguez cheerfully. "Your entertainment appears fixated on extinction-level events," Glick stated. "Is your species experiencing some form of collective death wish?" The humans exchanged glances, then burst into laughter. The sound was so unexpected that a Vulcan cultural attaché took an involuntary step backward. "Oh, those disaster movies? Nah, we just find them fun," Rodriguez explained. "There's something cathartic about watching the world almost end and then seeing people pull together and save it. But you also produce entertainment where your civilization is destroyed and not saved," pressed Glix. The human called Nkosi shrugged. "Sometimes it's interesting to explore worst-case scenarios. Doesn't mean we want them to happen." "And your consumption of toxic substances?" continued Glix. "The intentional bacterial fermentation of dairy products and liquid refreshments." "You mean cheese and beer?" Dr. Marcus laughed. "They're delicious. Wait until you try a good aged cheddar with a craft IPA. It'll blow your mind." Several delegates looked alarmed at the idiom "blow your mind," which their translators rendered literally. "And your recreational activities?" Glix pressed on, his mandibles now clicking in agitation. "Deliberately leaping from high altitudes, sliding down frozen precipitation accumulations, skydiving and skiing?" Officer Patel grinned. "They're exhilarating. Nothing makes you feel more alive than a little bit of controlled danger." Chancellor Zorp found his voice. "But why risk harm for no practical purpose?" The humans looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Because it's fun?" offered Lieutenant Gardner. "Because life's about experiences? Because feeling your heart race and conquering a challenge gives you a better appreciation for existence." The grand reception hall fell silent as the Federation delegates collectively struggled to process this philosophy. Captain Rodriguez seemed to sense the discomfort and attempted to bridge the gap. "Look, I get that we might seem a little intense from the outside, but all those things you're questioning, our entertainment, our food, our sports, our memes, they're expressions of what makes us human. We push boundaries. We try new things. We laugh at ourselves. We find joy in challenges. You also wage war," said the Andorian security chief bluntly. "Your history is filled with conflict. Rodriguez's expression sobered. Yes, we're not perfect. We've made plenty of mistakes, but we learn from them. That's also part of being human. We mess up, we acknowledge it, we try to do better. And what exactly do you hope to gain from Federation membership? Asked Chancellor Zorp, finally asking the question that had been bothering him since the mysterious box had arrived. The 5 humans exchanged glances, and for the first time, they seemed to be choosing their words carefully. Connection, said Captain Rodriguez simply. Exchange of ideas. The chance to be part of something bigger than ourselves. We've spent thousands of years looking up at the stars, wondering if we're alone. Now we know we're not, and we're excited to join the conversation. There was something disarmingly earnest in the human's response that gave Zorp pause. Before he could formulate a reply, however, disaster struck. Lieutenant Gardner, gesturing enthusiastically while explaining the concept of high fives, accidentally knocked over an ancient Vulcan ceremonial urn that had stood undisturbed in the grand reception hall for over 12,000 cycles. The urn shattered, its fragments scattering across the highly polished floor. The hall went deathly silent. The destruction of such a historical artifact during a first contact meeting was unprecedented. According to Federation protocol, such an incident should trigger an immediate suspension of diplomatic relations and a formal censure. Before anyone could cite the relevant regulation, however, all 5 humans dropped to their knees and began carefully gathering the fragments. I'm so sorry, Gardner said, looking genuinely distressed. That was completely my fault. Is this something that can be repaired? We have some amazing restoration techniques, or maybe we could replace it somehow. The Vulcan ambassador stepped forward, his face impassive but his voice noticeably cooler. That urn contained the preserved first meditation of Surik, the father of Vulcan logic. It is irreplaceable. The humans' faces fell in collective dismay. Captain Rodriguez straightened up, the gathered fragments cupped carefully in her hands. I understand that no apology can make up for this, she said quietly. All I can say is that it was an accident, and we take full responsibility. If there's any way we can make amends, any task or quest or challenge, we're willing to try. The word quest caused several Federation linguists to exchange concerned glances. Chancellor Zorp looked at the fragments, at the earnest faces of the humans, and at the assembled delegates of the Federation. In their rigid protocols and carefully structured interactions, had they lost something that these humans still possessed? Beneath their chaotic exterior, there seemed to be a genuine desire to connect, to make things right, to face challenges head-on rather than process them through committees. Before he could formulate this thought into words, his communication device chimed with an urgent message. The content made all 7 of his eye stalks widen in alarm. It appears, he said slowly, that 17 different Federation member worlds have already begun unilateral communication with Earth. The Ferengi have opened negotiations for something called streaming rights to human entertainment. The Andorians have requested exchange of cold weather recreational technologies, and the Balians have expressed interest in something called reality TV format licensing. Deputy Director Glix made a sound like a steam valve releasing. But that's in violation of at least 342 Federation protocols regarding unified diplomatic approach to new species. Captain Rodriguez had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Yeah, about that. We might have sent a few additional starter kits to other planets we detected communications from. We figured it couldn't hurt to introduce ourselves to the neighbors. The humans had bypassed the entire Federation protocol structure and gone straight to member worlds, creating relationships before the central bureaucracy could even process their initial application. It was bold, presumptuous, and completely outside of established procedure. It was, Zorp had to admit, impressively effective. An emergency session of the full Federation Council was convened immediately. For the first time in known history, the standard opening procedures were waived in the interest of time, a concession that caused several elder delegates to require medical attention. The humans waited patiently in a designated observation area while the council debated their fate. Or rather, they waited impatiently but politely, fidgeting asking countless questions about Federation technology, and somehow convincing a Tellarite custodian to explain the entire history of a species in exchange for something called a high five. Inside the council chamber, chaos reigned. The faction opposed to human membership had grown vocal, led by species with particularly rigid social structures. They are unpredictable, emotional, and potentially destabilizing to the careful balance we have maintained for millennia, argued the Vulcan High Commissioner. Their inclusion requires further study, at least 100 cycles of cultural quarantine. They handed out starter kits to member worlds without authorization, added a Benzite delegate, his breathing apparatus wheezing with indignation. Such flagrant disregard for protocol cannot be rewarded. Yet the pro-human faction had also grown surprisingly strong. The Ferengi ambassador was particularly enthusiastic. Their concept of entertainment media has immense profit potential, he pointed out, and their extreme sports would revolutionize the recreation industry across the quadrant. Think of the business opportunities. Most surprising was the Klingon delegation, normally reserved in Federation matters. They seek challenges for the sake of challenge, rumbled the Klingon ambassador. They consume food that tests their endurance. They value honor and direct approach. There is merit in their way. Chancellor Zorp, trying to maintain order while his digestive system staged a full-scale rebellion, noticed something disturbing. Throughout the chamber, delegates who had viewed the human memes were now using human phrases and gestures. A young Andorian aide had just told her superior to chillax. A Vulcan observer had been heard muttering facepalm after a particularly illogical argument. The humans were already influencing Federation culture, and they hadn't even been admitted yet. Esteemed colleagues, Zorp finally said, calling for attention. We must reach a decision. The human representatives await our response, and 17-member worlds are already engaged in unauthorized communications with Earth. Deputy Director Glix, who had been frantically consulting regulations, looked up from his datapad. Chancellor, there is no precedent for this situation. In 17,433 cycles, no species has ever bypassed the application protocols or initiated multilateral contact before formal admission. What are our options? Asked Zorp wearily. Technically, we could reject their application and issue a formal censure, said Glix. However, given that member worlds have already established relations, it would be ignored, finished Zorp. Most likely, admitted Glix. And if we formally quarantine them, forbid contact for 100 cycles of study, as suggested. Glix's mandibles clicked in the lexiconian equivalent of a wry smile. Based on our analysis of human psychology, they would probably see it as a challenge. A thoughtful silence fell over the council. Finally, a Denobulan philosopher who had been silent until now spoke up. Perhaps we're approaching this from the wrong perspective, she suggested. For 17,000 cycles, we have integrated species that follow our established patterns of development. The humans represent something different, a species that achieved in 200 years what takes most 2,000. Their approach is chaotic, yes, but undeniably effective. What are you suggesting? Asked Zorp. That instead of trying to make them fit our existing categories, we create a new one, the Denobulan said. A special designation for species that don't follow the standard developmental timeline. A procedural exception? Glix sounded scandalized. An acknowledgement of exceptional developmental patterns, corrected the Denobulan. We could call it the Exceptionally Unique Contributor Species designation. The council chamber buzzed with conversation. Creating a new membership category was unprecedented, but then again, so was everything about the human situation. The alternative, the Denobulan pointed out gently, is that we reject their application and they continue developing without Federation guidance. Based on their historical and entertainment records, an unsupervised humanity might be considerably more chaotic than one within our community. At least as members, there would be some regulatory framework. The argument resonated with even the most skeptical council members. The idea of humans continuing their rapid technological advancement without any Federation oversight was more alarming than the prospect of integrating them. "I move that we create this new designation," said Chancellor Zorp, his eye stalks finally aligned in a rare moment of certainty. "The exceptionally unique contributor species category will allow us to acknowledge humanity's unusual development path while maintaining the integrity of our existing processes." The motion passed with a comfortable majority, not the unanimous agreement the Federation preferred, but a clear mandate nonetheless. As the formal vote was recorded, Zorp couldn't help but notice that several younger delegates were exchanging what appeared to be thumbs-up gestures, a human mannerism they had somehow already adopted. "Deputy Director Glix," Zorp said, "please inform the human representatives of our decision." Glix scuttled forward, his professional demeanor partially restored now that a procedural solution had been found. "Of course, Chancellor. I shall prepare the formal notification documents immediately. The standard acceptance package is 7,000 pages, but given the circumstances, perhaps we could expedite with the abbreviated 3,500-page version." Zorp sighed. "I suspect the humans would prefer an even more condensed version." "A verbal notification?" Glix sounded scandalized. "But without the proper documentation, how will they understand the 14,377 regulations that new members must adhere to?" "I believe," Zorp said dryly, "that they would say they'll figure it out as they go." The signing ceremony for Earth's admission to the Federation should have been a dignified, solemn affair. The Federation's ceremonial protocols for new member admission had been refined over thousands of cycles to create an atmosphere of profound historical gravity. What they got instead was something the humans called a party. The 5 human representatives had been overjoyed at their acceptance, with Captain Rodriguez immediately suggesting they break out the champagne to celebrate. Before anyone could consult the regulations regarding intoxicating substances at diplomatic functions, bottles had been opened, glasses had been distributed, and the humans were proposing a toast. To new friends, new adventures, and a bigger, better Federation. Rodriguez declared, raising her glass. "Cheers!" The human custom of clinking glasses caused tremendous confusion, with several delegates believing it to be some form of combat challenge. Others, however, found themselves unexpectedly charmed by the ritual's simplicity. The formal signing, when it finally happened, was accompanied by human-style congratulatory gestures that left several delegates nursing minor injuries. The Andorian ambassador received an enthusiastic high five with such force that his antennae remained slightly askew for days afterward. The Tellarite delegation, after initial resistance, discovered they actually enjoyed the concept of fist bumps, finding the light collision curiously satisfying. Most surprising was the reaction of the Vulcan High Commissioner, who, after observing the emotional display with typical Vulcan stoicism, simply raised his hand in the traditional Vulcan salute and said, "Live long and prosper, humans of Earth." Captain Rodriguez, without missing a beat, returned the gesture perfectly and replied, "Peace and long life. And thank for having us. We brought tacos." The mention of tacos caused yet another ripple of confusion and interest through the assembly. The concept of folded flatbread containing various fillings was not entirely alien to many Federation species, but the human enthusiasm for this particular food configuration was baffling. Chancellor Zorp, watching the proceedings with a mixture of resignation and amusement, realized that the Federation had just changed irrevocably. For millennia, they had proceeded according to carefully structured protocols, integrating species that followed predictable development patterns and shared certain philosophical perspectives. The humans were different. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't follow established pathways. They skipped steps, took shortcuts, and somehow still arrived at their destination, usually bearing snacks and ready to party. As the ceremony concluded and the humans began distributing what they called party favors, small Earth artifacts that several xenoanthropologists would later spend years studying, Zorp noticed something curious. Throughout the Grand Hall, Federation delegates who had initially been wary or outright hostile to the humans were now engaging with them, asking questions, laughing at their jokes, and even attempting to replicate their gestures. The humans had an infectious quality, Not in the pathological sense, though the Federation's medical team was still running tests, just to be sure, but in their enthusiasm, their openness to new experiences, and their seemingly boundless curiosity. They were chaos incarnate. Yes, but perhaps the Federation had grown too comfortable in its orderly existence. Perhaps a little chaos was exactly what they needed. Deputy Director Glix approached, his mandibles now clicking in a more relaxed rhythm. Chancellor, I must admit, I had significant reservations about the humans. But they've taught me something quite unexpected. What's that, Deputy Director? Asked Zorp. The value of winging it, I believe they call it, Glix replied, using a human idiom with careful precision. Sometimes improvisation yields results that careful planning cannot anticipate. Zorp nodded, his eye stalks bobbing in agreement. Indeed, though I suspect our administrative systems will require significant adjustment to accommodate human spontaneity. As if to prove his point, a burst of laughter erupted from across the hall, where a human was teaching a group of junior delegates something called the Macarena. I've taken the liberty, Glix continued, of establishing a new emergency protocol in our security systems. It's labeled in case of humans. What does this protocol entail? Asked Zorp curiously. At present, it simply reads, expect the unexpected, admitted Glix. We'll refine it as we gather more data. Zorp laughed, a rare sound from a Brachian chancellor. A wise precaution, though I suspect no amount of planning will fully prepare us for what comes next. In the months that followed Earth's admission to the Federation, the predicted cultural disruption became reality. Human memes spread through Federation communication channels with alarming speed. Junior officials began ending formal reports with TLDR summaries. The Vulcan Science Academy reported an increasing use of the phrase mind blown, following particularly significant discoveries. Federation cafeterias across the quadrant now offered Taco Tuesdays, and a previously little-known Ferengi entrepreneur had made a fortune importing something called hot sauce. Administrative efficiency, however, had improved dramatically. The human phrase, let's cut to the chase, had revolutionized committee meetings, reducing average duration from 12 hours to a mere 3. The concept of deadlines, while initially viewed as arbitrary and stressful, had accelerated decision-making processes across all departments. More significantly, several long-standing diplomatic impasses had been resolved through what humans called thinking outside the box, a concept that many Federation species had initially mistaken for a literal reference to spatial reasoning. As for the humans themselves, they had taken to Federation life with characteristic enthusiasm, establishing cultural exchange programs, culinary festivals, and even an interspecies sports league that modified Earth games to accommodate the varied physiologies of Federation members. The Andorians had proven surprisingly skilled at ice hockey, while the Caitians excelled at something called parkour. 6 months after Earth's admission, Chancellor Zorp received a curious notification. The first human-designed addition to the Federation Charter had been submitted for review. Intrigued, he accessed the document immediately. It was a simple, one-page proposal, brevity being another human innovation that was slowly infiltrating Federation bureaucracy. The title read, The Keep Calm and Carry On Amendment. Its content was straightforward. In emergency situations where standard protocols might impede necessary action, Federation officials were empowered to improvise practical solutions, provided they adhered to core Federation values and filed the appropriate paperwork afterward. It was simultaneously revolutionary and mundane, a perfect encapsulation of humanity's unique approach to life in the cosmos. Zorp approved it without sending it to committee, an unprecedented action that would have scandalized his predecessors but seemed entirely appropriate for this new era of Federation history. As he authorized the change, he noticed that the human proposal had come with a small attachment, a simple image of a curved line with 2 dots above it. An emoji. It was smiling at him, just like the one on the box that had started everything. This time, however, Zorp didn't find it unsettling. He even found himself attempting to arrange his eye stalks in a similar pattern, his species' approximation of a smile. The United Federation of Planets had asked what was in the Humanity Starter Kit, and the answer had turned out to be exactly what they needed without realizing it. A little chaos, a lot of enthusiasm, and a boundless curiosity that had propelled humans to the stars far faster than anyone thought possible. The Federation would never be the same. And despite his initial reservations, Chancellor Zorp was beginning to think that might be a very good thing indeed. Behind him, on his office wall, a new sign had been installed, a gift from Captain Rodriguez. It read, in elegantly stylized script, "The greatest adventure is what lies ahead." Below it, somewhat less elegantly, someone had added in marker, "Hold my beer." The future of the Federation promised to be many things, but boring was definitely not one of them.